welcome to the Music and the Web Series panel. Appreciate you guys coming out. This is the second panel of the day here. It's still obviously a little early, but we've got a really talented panel here. I'm really excited to be talking to some of these guys. To introduce you to me, first of all, my name is Mark Gardner. I'm the creator of Cell Web Series. I'm also a member of the IAWTV Board of Directors. I adore music and film. It's something that I really, really love and appreciate, and these are a bunch of very talented people who have great projects out right now. So I'm very happy that they're going to be joining us on the panel. To begin with, we've got Pease Nistades, and I don't know, do you want to go ahead and give a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm a film composer originally from Thailand. I moved to Los Angeles a few years ago and started doing a lot of film both in the US and abroad, and recently started doing video games and web series because of Dragon Age. And Jason here worked with me on it. He was my music editor and featured musician on the score. So, Jason.
I'm mainly a songwriter, and for the last couple of years, been working more on composing. I've done music for the Guild, web specifically, the Guild, My Gimpy Life. I'm also the music director in a new web musical series with Kevin Sorbo and Juliette Landau called Malfolia, so that's been a lot of fun to work on. And then in my other life, I was in a band, or still am in a band called Godhead, and toured with acts like Marilyn Manson, Ozzy Osbourne, Disturbed, Rammstein, and I've written songs with Marilyn Manson, members of Evanescence, Nine Inch Nails, and even Paul Anka. So, there you go.
My name is Brian Satterwhite. I'm a film composer from Austin, Texas, and I've been working professionally for about 15 years. Cell, the web series, is the web series that I scored a couple years ago. I'm pretty involved, and I have my hands in a lot of different pots in the film music world. I'm a journalist, a member of the International Film Music Critics Association. I write for various websites. I have my own film music radio show back in Austin. Starting next week, I'm going to be a lecturer at the University of Texas, teaching a class on film music. So I'm pretty wrapped up in the craft of music for film, and it's been my passion and my lifeblood for about the last 20 years or so.
So I want to start off because I think there's a fairly common theme through here, is that you all have a pretty varied background, from Godhead to scoring feature films to, I think I saw that you were just working on some slot machine soundtracks recently.
Yeah, I just did a slot machine thing. I mean, I'm originally from classical music background, so.
Right. So we've got quite the varied background in here. I'm wondering if you guys can talk briefly about, or not briefly, as long as you want, about the differences between your background and what you've had to change, if anything, when you're scoring for the web, for the time constraints, for the financial constraints, anything like that. What has that been like compared to your previous experience?
Should I start?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I think we just approached it like any other project. You know, we didn't score episode by episode. We scored it as a whole 1 hour pilot, basically. And I think all the projects that I do, I always start from the story, the script, the characters. What's the thread that's, you know, binding the film together. And so the general gist of thematic ideas and all that type of stuff is the same, I think, regardless if you're doing TV or feature films or games. It's all about the storyline and the themes and the characters. In regards to the web series, though, we knew that each episode would be about 6 to 7 minutes, with the final episode being about 11 or 12. So we wanted to make sure, of course it's web, and so you can easily click away at any second, and so we needed to capture the audience's attention and hopefully keep that at a different pace than you would on a feature film, where there could be perhaps more silence and more space, you know, within the storytelling. So as a result, Dragon Age had a lot more music in it to drive the scenes and the thematic ideas.
Okay.
I think a cool transition for me, going from like being a rock musician to composing, was I started doing music for commercials, and then music for movie trailers, and then that eventually led to what I'm doing now. But I think the hardest transition for me was when you're dealing with, say, an executive, and this happens a lot more in commercials, whereas not being married, so to speak, to the parts that you made, and knowing that they all sort of need to be modular and fit in these different spots. We're going from a real creative, like, I'm a tortured artist, this is what it is, and to, okay, now I know that I have to please the client, and this is sort of part of it. So it's like merging your creative juices and what you want to see creatively to the fact that, well, there's a whole committee behind how they want to do it, and maybe each member of the committee has a different vibe on what they think it should sound like, and sort of compromising with everyone in the meantime.
Cell was my first and so far only web series, and my experience on it was pretty amazing because I'm used to all these different mediums, and the reason I love film music so much is there's nothing that's off limits when you're speaking about music. When you're talking about styles and genres and flavors and instruments, and there's nothing that's off limits. And film is very unique from television. The way that you go about the process, the approach, the creative thought process, and the whole ordeal. And then web series comes along, and this was a new experience for me. And I found out it's not film and it's not television. It's its own very unique thing. And again, just from the one experience that I had, I just found it to be this really cool medium because I think it has some similarities to television. The way that I scored it was episode by episode. I got the first one, scored it. A week or two later, I got the second, scored it. And it's like television in that you're planting these seeds, knowing, I read the scripts, I know where the story is going, and I'm planting these seeds, knowing what they're going to eventually grow into, but I haven't seen it yet. And television is a lot like that. But the brevity of each episode makes it different than television because you're kind of, the arc that you try to shape in each individual segment is, it's just so much tighter, so much shorter. You don't have the breadth that you even do in TV. In television, it depends on the show and what you're working on, but it's made up of a lot of shorter cues. And in my particular series that I got to score, I would, in a 5 or 6 minute episode, I might have 3 or 4 minutes of music. It depends on the episode. But I just found it to be this very unique thing, and I treated it in a unique way. I said, okay, this is different. I'm going to approach it differently because I don't think you can take the episodes of Cell and just string them together and make a movie at it. Just that particular series, I don't know. At least I don't think the music would work that way. If it were a 90-minute movie, I would have scored it probably quite a bit differently. And if there were longer episodic TV shows, I would have scored it quite a bit differently. But because it's its own unique thing, I treated it that way. And I just had an absolute blast working on it just because it was this new territory for me that was different than everything else that I'd worked on before.
So did you find it was more intense? Did the music not do that web episodes, like more music jammed into that short period of time?
Yes and no. I mean, I can, again, it's one project that I'm talking about. This particular project, yes, did rely on music fairly intensely. But having said that, where there was no music, it was almost like this surgical precision that we're looking for. Wherever there's not a note of music in Cell, very deliberate. I mean, and we painstakingly went over it, and because that's the type of score and that's the type of series where the tiniest degree of variation in the music tipped the drama vastly one way or another. So you're riding this really, really thin line, and you can't go too far one way or the other. So that particular series, I felt was very intense, did rely heavily on the music. The music was allowed to do quite a bit, which again is a real thrill from my vantage point.
Yeah, I think web series in general, if most episodes are 6 to 8 minutes, you've got to tell the story on the screen and audibly. You've got broader strokes. You've got to kind of be more obvious, because if you're trying to tell a story in an episode that normally on TV you'd see in 22 minutes, you've got 6 minutes to sort of tell that same story. So I find that it tends to be more dramatic and more intense. Yeah, which may make the transition easier for me, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
And also, I think with Dragon Age, I mean, it's, we're working with a fantasy realm, and so it was really exciting to find different sounds for the different races and the different characters that are there, that are in the in the story, and so that way, when there's a big battle, there's a lot of fight sequences. It's music is one of the great things that can help show what's going on. So and so is wounded, so and so is winning, losing. What is so and so feeling like? And so what I did was, because I came on board Dragon Age quite early. I was on board while they were shooting. So I don't know, Jason, you weren't on board then.
No,
though.
not yet.
But I got to visit all the sets, which were all shot in and around Los Angeles, and so I was on the sets a lot and got to talk to the actors and the cinematographers and all the different people involved in it, to try to be part of what they're doing, and I always find that to be. To be, you feel more like you're part of the family than when you're coming in just in post. And at that point, the deadline is looming, and the director's been, shooting for months, and it gets a little bit tense, and you don't really have the time that you would if you came on earlier to really experiment. And so while I was visiting set and reading the script, I was developing themes and sound, and so I'd be talking to Peter, our director, and showing him bits and pieces during the production process. And then he went off and cut the film. For a couple months, I went off and did several other projects, and then came back to see the actual assembly of the thing. Because with fight sequences, there's no way you can tell what the pacing is going to be like when they're shooting, because it's like, cut. All right, let's do another setup. And so you get the feel for it. You get the vibe of what they're trying to achieve. And especially with John Bartley, our DP on Dragon Age, he's a really amazing DP. He worked on Lost and X-Files and stuff. And so it was really amazing to see his work, see the set and then see what he's capturing. And that's what I try to do with music, especially on a series like this, is to try to be as much part of the story as possible, and to really sink in. But at the same time, with this type of genre, you do have to, as Jason pointed out, have to be a little bit more, not as subtle as one would in, say, a psychological thriller or a drama.
And with Dragon Age, you had the sort of advantage in the sense that we knew it was only going to be a 6-episode series, and besides cut changes that were almost constantly being made, we at least got rough cuts of every episode. So we knew that in episode 6 there was this epic battle, and that there was going to be, I think that episode was 12 minutes, which was the longest episode.
But there was almost 10 minutes of music.
Right, so it was music from beginning to end. It was like the final battle. And also the unique thing about Dragon Age was, because it was sponsored by BioWare to go hand in hand with the game. It was probably a larger budget than a lot of web series, and so we were, Pease really. I mean, it's a 45-minute score, and it's, for lack of a better comparison, it's basically taking place in a Lord of the Rings type world. I mean, they went for it with production design and everything. I mean, it's, you're fully immersed in that, and so, he went for that type of epic score, which is, I would say, probably not typical of most web series. There's more web series are for lower budget and take place in the environments that you can get for free or cheaper or something like that.
Well, let's talk about that real quick, because obviously, most series out there are not going to have the full budget of hundreds of thousands of dollars. But there are plenty of creators that are wanting to make these great productions. So what can creators do? And I want to come back to talk more about Dragon Age specifically, but while we're on this, what can creators do for music? We've gone from in the early days where it's just some guy sitting at his computer just putting together some samples, and that was the score of their show, to you had the Hudson Philharmonic, we had live strings for sale. There's a lot going on in music now. What can creators do with the budget in mind to still get those huge sweeping scores that are so important to really strong music and score?
Well, I think one of the biggest advantages right now is the new technology that is available to us now, whereby it used to be you could not technically get the big Horner or John Williams type sound without a 60, 80 to 100 piece orchestra. Well, you still can't really, but there's many more ways to cut corners and to get something close to that. And so I think something that we did specifically on Dragon Age was we knew that the scope was really big, and I usually try to incorporate other sounds as part of the score that aren't necessarily orchestral, but to have it organic based. And so we did a lot of recording sessions where we had recorded scraps of metal for the knight character. He wears a lot of metal, and so I wanted to incorporate that into his sound. We record lots of wood, trees and branches flapping and things like that we used as part of Felicia's character, the elf, because she's a wood elf, and things like that. And I think those are things that we can do now. We can go out and get organic materials and incorporate that as part of our sound, and it makes it a more unique sound for the series. And I think one of the things I used to work over at Hans Zimmer's studio, and one of the things I learned and love very much about what he does and what a lot of people who come out of there do is they try to find a unique sound for each film. And I got to work with this fantastic guy, Clay Duncan, who spends days creating, for instance, bass sounds for Transformers or things like that, and he'll just spend several days just locked away experimenting and creating these specific sounds. And so when you watch the film and you hear the score, there are specific sounds that become signature sounds for the film. And so when I started doing my own stuff, I felt like, well, why can't we apply that? Probably not on the scale that they would do on Transformers, but on a smaller scale, and eventually, to have your own unique sound. So that's what we did a lot, and on most of my scores, particularly on Dragon Age. And then we also brought in a lot of live musicians. So we had strings, brass, woodwinds, choir, many different types of guitars, most of which Jason played, and a few soloists here and there. And I think, again, the technology is available now for us to create decent mock-ups, to present to our directors, and to have discussions that they can hear closer to what's going to actually be in the film. But I usually like to use this analogy of, I think a good mock or a great mock-up is still like a really good previs in visual effects world. It's there, you see what the action is, you see generally what's going on, but it's not the cut, you don't really see it. And once you bring the musicians in to really perform and play this, the emotions really come out, and you really start to hear the score, and it comes to life. So I always bring musicians on, because I think that's unless it's supposed to be an electronic score. I really believe that you can't really replicate that.
But I think one of the things.
I'm sorry, what? Not what?
Non-union.
Yes. Unfortunately, that has to be the case.
And then I think you can scale it for the production too, depending on what your budget is, and that is one of the advantages of how good samples have gotten. That you could have one string soloist over string samples, and once it's mixed, it sounds pretty darn good. Of course, in the ideal situation, you want to use the 60-piece orchestra, but for the web you can't. So, I think that's
Hopefully at
that's
some point you will be able to.
right.
Someday soon.
Right, but I think that's really the advantages of the technology too. Even drum samples have gotten amazing for more rock oriented stuff. Some stuff you can't tell the difference because it's a real drummer playing a real drum, and get a good programmer in there or program it right, and no one can tell the difference.
It's an interesting panel because I'm now going to talk about the opposite side of the spectrum. Because with Cell, we're talking low budget of things, and when Mark brought the project to me, I kind of told myself not to do any more projects like this because they're hard. Low budget, no budget projects, they're just hard.
It ends up being like $5 an hour.
Your idea, your ideas are for what. But I really enjoyed the series, so I took it on and trying to put this score together. I had a budget of $0. That was my budget. So as far as producing the music, I didn't have a whole lot of options. The options are go completely electronic. Personally, my history, I'd say in the last 6 years, I have been kind of steering away from using more and more technology. Not necessarily intentionally, it's just kind of where I've creatively gone. And my kind of philosophy is instead of going larger and using more technology, I'm going smaller and using as many musicians, live musicians. In other words, if I have $100, am I going to use all samples, or am I going to hire a single violinist for $100? That's the direction I have been taking my career in the last 6 or 7 years or so. Mostly just because of not the sound limitations, because you're right. I hear these, these recordings and these scores using samples, and they sound fantastic. There's no, hands down about it.
Even some network television shows are doing that.
And they sound fantastic. For me, it's a compositional limitation thing, because no matter how many options you have in a sample library, and they're getting to be quite extensive, you're still only limited to what those sounds can do.
Exactly. I was just saying exactly.
Yeah, and so again, if I have a low budget, I would rather try to score it with as few live musicians as I can afford. And with Cell, that's what we started off doing. I had $0, and I have friends in town, so I recruited a string quartet. I told Mark, let's score this for string quartet. I think we can do it. The whole series, it'll be great. And that's kind of indicative of how I kind of go about working on low budget projects. But had to get volunteers, friends that would just do it for free, and that's always not my favorite thing to do in the world. And I think I scored the first 2 or 3 episodes. I can't remember altogether. It was maybe the first 2, and then we went in the studio to record it. Of course, it took a long time, and I'm feeling bad about my players for having to be in there. And then we did the 3rd episode, and it took a long time. And after a while, I was like, this isn't going to work. I don't like bringing in people that much. I thought I could maybe have 2 big sessions and bang out all the episodes, and that was a little too ambitious. And so we basically scored the first 3-4 episodes with the string quartet, and then went a different direction. Now that opens up an interesting thing too, because it's kind of a happy accident, because right around that time the drama in the episode changed, and the absence of the strings and the direction that I went really, I think, helped the series. It's kind of weird going back and watching it. To have basically what I scored the rest of the series with, a sampled harp that I love, I use all the time, piano, and a little bit of drums, kind of these bigger drums, and this one metallic sound. That's basically it. So the rest of the series was scored with 3 or 4 tracks. Very minimal, very thin. Again, that kind of surgical precision where the slightest little change, makes a huge difference in the drama. And in the end, artists trying to make it work can afford to bring in a good college caliber violinist, cellist, whatever, and it just make a world of difference. Sample your piano or all your other instruments, bring in that live cello, record them, and wow. It just that's kind of what I was trying to say with my earlier point. don't immediately dismiss that just because you don't have any money. There's creative ways to go about trying to solve the obstacle of low or no money.
But I also think that it's very important to communicate that with your filmmakers. And I can say, for instance, on Dragon Age, we started off with a fairly low budget, and we had planned to do it a specific way because we knew that with the genre and the scope that the world of Dragon Age has that we needed to create, there was only a few ways one could go about doing that. And once schedules change all the time, as does with every production, I remember Jason and I were sitting down, we basically drafted up an email to our producer, and we said, so here's what's going on, here's what we need. We need to have these musicians to express these things. And we got twice as much money for the live musicians. So I think that, and that's something I try to do a lot with any of the filmmakers I work with, is we always have a sit down, Skype or phone call or in person, and discuss what we feel the concept for the score should be. And things always change. It's always never the way you think it's going to be at the beginning. And I've just went through that with I'm currently finishing up 2 feature films that both started off as one thing and eventually got bigger, not necessarily in scope, but bigger in what we decided to try and do with it. But so we know that that's probably going to happen as we're experimenting and developing the score. But usually at the beginning, I'll sit down and we'll try to figure out what we feel the score needs. And there have been many situations. Sometimes it's a situation where we start the work and they'll bring in a little more budget, or sometimes it just works out where usually I try to fight to have some musicians on there, and as you were saying, to not have to bring them in for huge favors, which we did on Dragon Age, by the way. So there were quite a few of those. But yeah, I think ultimately film is a very collaborative film, or anything that pairs stories with music. I think ultimately is a collaborative process. So I feel like in some of the best filmmaker-composer relationships, you should be able to be open enough to discuss that, and not necessarily that would actually come to fruition, but at least you're discussing that, and you're not the only side that's being that's feeling like you can't do this or you can't do that, and usually sometimes that opens up doors for even more experimentation. And perhaps even rethinking kind of the direction of what you're going to go in, and maybe going more, chamber, and going more intimate with specific live musicians, or perhaps incorporating some more electronic / sound design stuff, or things like that. But I think communication is a big thing.
So in the web world in general, correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounds like you would all agree that we need to stop doing everything with samples if we really want to up the level of what scores are doing for quality.
Living in Los Angeles, I'm always surprised at fledgling filmmakers or web producers on they seem to music seems to be an afterthought, and it's and we're not tooting our own horns here by saying that. I mean, music is really what defines a lot of productions on what makes it sound legitimate, and what makes you suspend disbelief and believe this is actually happening is a good score, and so I would just like to get that feeling out into the world that, hey, when you're putting your budget together for these projects, don't forget 10% for the music.
Or more.
Or more, but at least 10%, add it on top, because it's, if you want your audience to believe that this is a, professional production, what they're hearing is really sound design and score is what's going to make a huge difference.
It's interesting. I'm not, as much as I've kind of steered away from technology and samples and record. I don't want to be anti-technology, and I'm not. I use it every single day. It is imperative, to do what I do. I absolutely have to, and there are tools, and they're there. The thing I'm always saying is, these tools that are out there, they don't make people automatically good composers. It's just the same thing with like a high quality camera.
It doesn't make you a good photographer.
Just because you buy this $20,000 camera doesn't mean you're a great filmmaker all of a sudden.
Right.
The same thing with the music side of things. Tools in the hand of a skilled craftsman can wield some pretty great results. But yeah, every project's different, and you have to kind of approach it that way. I think going. The thing that I would like to convey as it pertains to web series is to don't be afraid to continue to think outside the box. Like constantly be thinking of all the different options. Don't just go with the status quo. Don't think, well, everybody else is doing this, so I'm going to do that too. I really try to encourage just people thinking outside of the box.
Well, let's kind of go on that because you touched briefly on how every show is different. So I want to touch a little bit between the two shows. We've got Dragon Age and Cell, both nominated for awards this year. Starting off with Dragon Age, specifically, I'm kind of curious because you stepped into what was really an existing property. Yeah. Dragon Age, a very popular video game, hugely popular, with I played the game, I loved it, great score in the video game. Yeah. Did that affect your process at all going into scoring this? Did you use some of that as inspiration? Did you use some of that music? How did that affect what you were doing going into the series?
Well, yes and no. One of the things I was going to also comment on with the last topic that you discussed in terms of fledgling composers and stuff is I feel that fortunately we were very lucky with Dragon Age to work with Peter Winther, who has produced Independence Day and Godzilla and Stargate and all these huge films, and sat 5 feet away from John Williams conducting the score to Patriot. So he obviously comes from a background of filmmaking where he understands and really values music and thematic writing. And so one of the first conversations that Peter and I had was, he just said, I like themes. We got to have themes for the different characters and the different races and stuff. And I said, well, that's great, because I love that too. So that was kind of the initiation process, was discussing that. But of course, yes, we also, we were coming out of a big property. And so what I did was, between set visits and reading the script and starting to develop my ideas, I went back and played Dragon Age 1, and then Dragon Age 2 came out a few weeks later. So I played both of them, not the entire way through, because I wouldn't have had time to write the score. But I did go and touch base with them to get a feeling for the world that was created, not just musically, but visually, and how the music and the thematic ideas interact with that. And so we actually did, I came to Peter because we were figuring out what we wanted to do for the opening title cards, because they're the little explanations about the races and the different things that you're about to witness in the episode. And so I said to Peter, I think we should use the bum 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 bum, which is the big sort of Dragon Age thing you hear a lot over and over in the game. And so he said, oh, that's a great idea. So that's what we did. So the opening, every episode opens with our own rendition of that, to immediately engage our audience, who are primarily, I would assume, Dragon Age players or fans of the game, to give them a sense of familiarity and a sense of, okay, I know this world, and I'm going to go explore, the series. On the other hand, we are introducing a brand new character with Felicia's character Talus, and she is the main character going through that, which then evolves into her character in the actual game, Mark of the Assassin, that they did. And that was a really great pairing. And so
they ended up actually using part of his score in the game.
In the game.
Oh, that's great.
In the expansion, which is really cool.
Which is really cool. So on the other hand, I wanted to be respectful and understanding of Inon's original scores, but we were also taking it into our own different tangent. And also, it's going from a video game to a web series is a very different medium. Even though, like I said, I approach themes the same way. I usually just think about what themes, what colors would work, but the way of tackling the actual scoring is very different. And so we had to tell a lot more quickly.
Makes sense. Well, let me ask you too, because classically trained, Godhead, working together on this, and rock on. But how was that like? Did those two worlds? How did you mesh them together in producing this? I mean, what was that like working together with those two? I don't want to call them competing, but a lot of people would see them as competing. How did that work?
Well, I had a classical background as a classical singer for 5 years before I became a touring rocker. So I was able to, I think, speak his language somewhat, which is how we worked together. But it was fun because we added there's a lot of distorted guitar and like rock guitar underneath the classical score, just sort of peeking out here and there that you might not know that that's what it is, but it was there. But yeah, and this was the first project that we worked on together. Now we've worked on other projects, and we're actually going to be co-scoring a feature film later this year together. So, I guess
I think probably the first thing that brought us together was our love of Howard Shore's Lord of the Rings score.
Yeah.
I think one of the first things that we said, and when I started writing, that was one of the biggest things, because not coming from a video game background necessarily, but certainly coming from Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, you see there's a lot of similarities. Yeah. And so it was which is one of the reasons I decided to go play the game, so that I'm not thinking, oh, this is the orc, this version of the orcs, or this version of some other thing, and that I'm really understanding and being part of this world. But that was one of the earlier things that we discussed with Peter as well, which is that as much as he liked orchestral thematic type scores, we wanted to find a sound that could modernize that a little bit. And so we have I like Felicia's, the main kind of musical is like very Celtic. I love Celtic music, and she's an elf, so we of course had to have some Celtic influence in that. But we had a lot of acoustic guitars and distorted metal guitars hidden to give. Again, I think this is one of the creative solutions of not having a big budget, is that I needed to try and redefine the sound, or maybe redefining is a big term, but to define it for our series. And part of how we did that was to combine sounds. There's a lot of electronics in the score. It may not sound like it, but it's really hidden underneath.
Then even like in the final battle, we have brass and woodwinds, and then we've got distorted metal guitar in there too. But since I'm actually playing it, it's that same sort of illusion of, even though it's not, there's not 10 string players there, there's an electric guitar, and it just sort of becomes this wall of sound that's played by actual players that seem to do the trick.
So the budget considerations, but also the fact that this is a web series that we do want to project to a perhaps younger audience. We want to be able to create a sound that could define that for it and help hook the audience into that. And I think that was one of the places that Jason came in to be a big part of that as well. Is not only him playing, but bringing some musicians and some ideas like that. For instance, the big battle sequence, even though it's this sort of orchestral thing with big choirs and stuff, it does have. I remember we were recording the with your distorted guitar, and after the take, you're like, "Wow, that's really fast, even for a metal song." And so we did have, aspects of that really blended together, and I think that's was a great thing about the restraint as well, is that it causes you to think out of the box and think a little differently than if we did have the 80-piece orchestra.
That's very interesting how you guys were able to take that and work together like that. That's very interesting. Brian, let's go to Sel for a minute, because I'll be honest with you, I had no idea you were going that way for the score when we first started. I had always imagined something different. So I want to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what got you to that point where you thought, string quartet, we're going to make this a string quartet, and how did that really evolve? Because by the end of the series, it was a different world than what we started off with. How did that evolve for you?
I'm trying to remember my earliest ideas for the score. I mean, it was all budgetary. I mean, I'm watching the first, again, I read all the scripts, I'm watching the first episode, and I'm immediately getting a feel of the colors and the timbre, that it's a darker series, a lot of mystery, a lot of kind of that curiosity and intrigue going on. And it was mostly just a budgetary thing. It's like, well, what palette, what is the kind of the cheapest live musician palette that I can work with that will give me, really small moments and really large moments, be very versatile and give me a diverse sound. And that was a string quartet. I like working with string quartets. I use them quite often. And so really it came down to that. And again, if we had a budget per episode kind of thing, I don't know, I might have gone in a completely different direction. But that's just one of those things that comes out of that. And again, it refined even more when it realized that it was just that lack of budget just presented too many problems even using the string quartet. So I still had all these goals, I still had all these things I wanted to do. So now what do I have to do in order to kind of maintain the goals but change the direction? But again, I think it turned out to be a good thing, because again, the series changed right around the time that the music started to change, and it just ended up being kind of I like to say, I kind of wish I was like, yeah, that was all intentional and did that on purpose, but really we just kind of ran out of money that we didn't have to begin with, so.
Fair enough. Next time I'll do better, Brian. I kind of wanted to real quick before I do start opening up, because I do want to open up pretty quick to our audience. We've talked about, we've got the budgetary, obviously, limitations, which caused a lot. It caused the change from the string. It caused more of a melding between the guitar and the unique sounds and everything in there. From a budgetary constraint, we kind of get that creatively. Just real quickly before we go on there, I know that everybody here is ridiculously talented, award-winning composers doing a lot of stuff. What's your process? The very first thing when do you see the entire finished thing? Do you start with the script and start working then, or do you wait until you see your final rough cuts? What's your process, and what do you think? And I don't know if...
In general, or for web series? Or?
In general. Just in general, for anybody out there that's a composer that's interested.
I think, the short answer is it just depends on the project. I have a different process for every project I think I've ever done. Sometimes thematic writing will come first. Sometimes I'll sit down and I'll spend a week just trying to perfect that theme and make it just right. Sometimes the theme will just kind of be born of the music that I'm writing. That's the case of Cell. There's a prominent theme that is totally woven throughout the whole series. I didn't come up with that beforehand. I was composing, and then it just kind of presented itself in the middle of episode 1. I was like, and I used it again and used it again. Next thing I know, oh, this is my theme, and I just kind of let the music do what it wanted to do. But every project is different. I generally like to see the finished product. One of the cool things about a web series is you don't get to do that. So that was going into what I was saying earlier about it being unique and being a cool thing. Earlier in my career, I was reading scripts and trying to get involved as much as I could as early as I can, and that's still great advice, and that's still something that I always try to say, get your composers involved early, pre-production if you can. But as I kind of getting through the career where I am now, I'm electing just to want to watch the film. If we're on a tight schedule and there's just no time and I need to get up to speed on the story, I say give me the script. But if they just have a cut, if the director says I'm going to have a cut in 2 weeks, I'll wait 2 weeks, just let me see the cut. It's a hard question to answer though, because every single project is different. The approach, the way you begin it, end it, everything in between. And I think I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I've always felt that it best serves the projects that way. Because every project has different needs and different requirements. When they come, it's trying to figure out, okay, what do you need? What do you want? And then being able to be versatile enough to do that.
I usually start from a script and a conversation with the director. Mainly because I feel like regardless of if it's a script or a rough cut or whatever, I think one of the biggest things is you want to be on the same page as your director. You want to understand what their vision is and what you can bring to the table. And I think with all great directors, and Peter was certainly the case with Dragon Age, and I'm actually currently working on his new film right now. They will bring you on board. We'll have a spotting session. In the case of his current film, Wicked, that I'm working on, I came on board much, much later. I knew about it because as we were finishing Dragon Age, he had to go off and shoot it. So I've been aware of it for a very long time, but I've just recently come on board. So in this case, we came on board, had a traditional spotting session where the director and I would go through the film and discuss where our music should be, what themes, etc. And then I'd just go from there. But I think it's very important to be on the same page, and I generally try to write away from picture before I start with the picture. Also because, I usually have either, if I'm starting that early, I'll sometimes have stills that they'll send me from set, or things like that, or I'll have the script or storyboard open in front of me as I'm coming up with ideas. But I think that it's very important as an artist to allow yourself to be creative and think out of the box without being inhibited by a particular scene. And I generally write a big suite of music because I think one of the most important things of film music or games or series or whatever that has a story is the story arc. So as I'm writing, I want to have an idea of this theme idea that I have for the beginning is going to eventually develop and grow into something like this at this point and then end like that. So I want to have a roadmap before I start writing the score so that I'm not just sort of, oh, this is kind of cool, let's explore that. I have a general blueprint of what the score is going to be, and so I generally take a lot of time to do that. And I think, again, with the advance of technology today, it's a lot easier to then take that and recut that but I don't want to say recut, but to resync it and then evolve from that point. But I also, because I think, for instance, I'm sure you can see this when you're watching these behind the scenes footage. When Howard Shore was scoring Lord of the Rings, Shelob was some giant gray blob with legs on it. So I also feel, especially in for instance with Dragon Age, with the fantasy world, where sometimes half the movie is visual effects or stuff that isn't there. Sometimes when you're watching it like that, and it's obviously not what it's going to eventually be, I think it's helpful to step away from visually and needing to hit certain dialogue moments and to just create and then see, and really that allows me a lot of time to just explore and create sounds. And for instance, on this film I'm doing with Peter, I spent a week creating different textures, some of which I had no idea at the time exactly where in the film it was going to be, but I felt like this is a cool idea, this is a sound that I like, that I'd like to eventually incorporate into something. And as you were saying, as you're writing things, sometimes things present themselves to you, and then you suddenly realize, oh, this is this person's motif, or this is this person's sound. But I usually try to create that suite so that by the time I go into scoring, I have a good idea. Also because, as part of any process, I think one of the biggest things about scoring or any creative thing is your first impression. And I think as you're viewing cut changes and getting different notes, and you're getting frustrated about scheduling and all these other stuff, it can very easily cloud what your original vision was, and sometimes you lose track of that. And so I always rely on being able to go back to that original piece of music and go, oh, okay, so that's where I was originally going to go, and then go from there. So there's a reference point for that.
For me, it really starts with the script and the characters, and really thinking about, after really examining the main characters, what kind of musical vibe or theme do I hear with each one of the main characters, and from there, like, backing out, and then speaking to I like to talk to the writer more than the director, first. Talk to the director a little bit later on, but I enjoy just getting the writer's perspective first on because then he'll tell you the backstory of each character that is not in the script. You know, and then that will inspire me for ideas. Backing up, before when I was just a songwriter, I always tried to write. I never tried to write a song in the same key twice. So if I wrote this song in D, then let me write that one in B flat or whatever. And what that did is that sort of stopped me from falling into bad habits and the same chord progressions and things like that, because I'll write primarily on guitar, and it's real easy to just fall into, you know, your fingers will fall into the same traps over and over again. But if you specifically pick a different key and different phrasings, you're going to find different ways to go. So I try to apply that, not necessarily in a different key for each character, but just you know, what will their mood and their sort of general aura, how would that speak to me and where I would take that character. And the fun thing about this web musical that I'm working on now is because each episode is like 6 to 8 minutes, each episode features a different song by a different character. So it's actually perfect for the background for me, because I can sort of apply what I used to do originally, you know, writing rock songs to now each character in the musical. So that's you know, really a ton of fun.
And I think it's actually a big advantage if your director is also a writer, which I think is the case in a lot of web series. I would assume is that
Right,
a lot
yeah.
of
hats.
There's a lot of and I think that's great. It's a great part of the process, because then you're talking to the originator of the story, and you're not talking to the director, who may actually have a completely different idea from
Right.
the writer, which happens
A lot.
So.
Yeah, and we're closing on time here, so I want to make sure we get those. And I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface. Haven't even talked about when to not score something. You know, when do you have silence on the screen? So we haven't even touched that. But before I kind of go on there, I want to see if there's any questions out there. There are. Yeah. Can you actually get to the mic because we're recording everything? Sorry, I know.
Can I try to just pop out just a few real quick ones?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I haven't worked with samples. So one question that I have is when you're talking about theme, you know, writing thematically, which I think is fantastic. There's all kinds of Hans Zimmer themes, you know, that just, oh my God, you know, amazing.
Yeah.
If you are, say, limited on budget, and you come back down to reality, so you're working with samples, you can't really afford to bring in live musicians, or maybe you can't even afford to bring in one of you guys that can actually have the skills to score things out, and to do that work. So you're limited to samples. Does that rule out themes? I don't know how that works. Do you have enough flexibility there to say, oh, if I use that, then?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think thematic stuff is more of a tool to tell the story. I think, especially in a long form type thing, like I would consider a web series or a TV series to be more long form, because as you're going, you want to be able to relate, and when this theme comes back, you know, I think samples versus real instruments and what particular ensemble you're going to put together for the score, of course, has a lot to do with budget, but is more part of your color palette. Whereas I think if you have a great theme, you can apply them to different palettes, and find the right palette. But of course, you can't write a theme for a violin solo and then have, I don't know, a synth play it. I mean, it wouldn't be the same. So they do go hand in hand. But I feel like ultimately, some of the greatest themes are hummable themes, and some of them have been, like, for instance, again referencing back to Lord of the Rings, for instance, I think all those themes have been used in many different ways. So regardless if it was a big string orchestra or one solo voice, it
Right.
still conveys that.
I was thinking the same thing. Like, I remember in an interview with Howard Shore, he had a certain theme for the Fellowship in the first Lord of the Rings movie, and he would, every time a new member of the Fellowship joined, he would add an instrument. So by the time all 9 guys were in the fellowship, you heard it was really full. But then if later when they split off, if there was 2 guys, you would really only hear 2 solo instruments. And so I think you could probably apply, that kind of technique. I mean, a theme could be 1 instrument playing by itself. So yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah,
rule
like
that out.
for instance, you hear in the Shire, you hear the big beautiful thing, and then when Gandalf falls, you hear a solo voice, and it's just as moving. So I think ultimately, thematic writing is just thematic writing. And like for instance, many times I'll write at the piano, or sometimes there are many times where I'll immerse myself into the story, and I'll just have to take a break, go for a hike, do whatever, and sometimes I'll just be humming it, and then I'll go, I need to run back now because I have an idea. And I think that's the important thing with the film.
Now, are you finding on some smaller projects that you're also kind of carrying on the role of sound designer or somewhat? The reason I'm asking
Yes,
is
definitely.
metallic samples, or what is something metallic you're doing?
Yeah.
Becoming sound designer as well?
On that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a super fine line at some point between sound design and score sometimes, and yeah, you'll find that a lot of times you are sort of a secondary sound designer.
But I try to separate them, because I feel, earlier on, I did the score for this film called Dark Woods, which is a psychological thriller, and half the score was sound design, and half the score was solo piano and stuff, more musical. But I find that you have to, for me, I think it's very important to separate the part of the process of sound designing and the part of the process of thematic, more musical, thinking about the story type stuff. Because it's too easy to, when you're doing sounds, to create like a 15-minute ambient thing, and then you're going, oh well, I'm short on time, let's just plop that in, and then cut that corner. And I feel like it's important to not do that.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to. Have you seen instances where maybe there's a combination of source material, where there's maybe some samples, there's some original composition with some musicians, and then maybe also something that's licensed? That you got some prog rock band, you go, there's 30 seconds there that I just love, that I'd like to be able to. Can you do that, or are we talking different languages here? Does that make it not work as a piece?
Well, a lot of times the director may be like, well, I what was that joke? Like, that love theme that you spent.
Oh, there's a joke on YouTube. They did this. There's these little cartoons where they animate little Lego pieces and they automate their voices. And so there's a joke where the composer goes in to meet with the producer, and one of the things that he said was, oh, that wonderful love theme that you spent 2 weeks writing? We've decided to replace that with a Taylor Swift song. And it's unfortunately it happens a lot. But I think, for instance, I did a film last year called Croquembouche, where the centerpiece of the film is not actually score, it's a song. And they had originally licensed, or they had originally put in Ella Fitzgerald or somebody, because the film took place in the 50s, the late 40s, early 50s. And of course, which will happen a lot in lower budget projects, where they'll say, well, we've put in Lady Gaga, but we can't afford her, so can you do something, And I think it's actually a really exciting part of the process, because in the case of Croquembouche, we knew that there was a scene that these 2 women were dancing, with their respective couples, and there was no dialogue, but you see their eyes and you see that there's this connection, and it's through this one song. So what we ended up doing was, I wrote the song, recorded the song, orchestrated the song. We had jazz trumpet, and it was like very noirish. It was really nice, and then I used the theme that I had wrote, the melody for that song, in the score. So there are many ways that we could creatively tie those in, and I think in a way it helps with the continuity of the story. Whereas depending on what type of film, of course, there are films where it makes sense to burst into a Nine Inch Nails song or something else. But I feel like there are sometimes it's used too much as perhaps a publicity thing.
Right, and a lot of times it's not the composer's decision. It'll be like a producer's decision or the director's decision. Like, okay, for these 2 minutes we're going to use this, like you said, Nine Inch Nails song or something like
The
that.
only thing I want to say about that is that you risk your audience having a prior association with that song that is different than whatever the song means to you. I mean, if there's a famous song out there, it may make you feel happy, so you think it's going to make the audience feel happy, but maybe half the audience, that's the song that they broke up with their girlfriend over, or whatever. I mean,
Right.
you can use pre-existing material in your films or whatever, but you're going to risk having your audience, some members, it's hard enough trying to get your audience to stay focused on your film. You don't want to throw a song in that's going to start making them think about their lives or what else is going on. So, it's kind of like a warning whenever that's the one thing I usually like to bring up when it comes to.
Well, I think also if you're on that, because part of this question can go to, there are plenty of websites now where you can get downloaded scores that you license for $10 or something like that.
Royalties
I'm going
and
to,
stuff, yeah.
yeah. So I'm going to guess I know how your opinion is on that in original shows, but I would say that just like Brian said, you do risk. I could watch Dragon Age, and if it had the same score as Cell, wait a minute, hold on, what's going on here? So I don't know. How do you guys feel about using those kind of resources for the low-budget composers or anything like that? Anyone? No?
I would always go for trying to create material that is original to the story. There's actually, just to segue just a little bit, there's actually I don't know if you've been following the Oscar race situation, but there's currently a big controversy going on with one of the scores that's potentially going to be nominated for The Artist, the French film, because in the big climax sequence they use Bernard Herrmann's love theme from Vertigo, and that's all I'm going to say on publicly. But that's a big issue that's being brought up about prior associations, especially from a score as iconic as that. So it's an interesting situation there.
Good.
Actually, I just want to comment on that quick, but there's plenty of instances where you can use pre-recorded music, and it does suit its purposes. I think like some TV shows like The X-Files, when they used popular music, it was very intentional. It was used effectively. You just have to be smart and know the music and how it can work, also working with score. But this kind of gets back to actually, I guess one question was brought up what you were talking about before is in terms of web series and people who are making them, I guess, and how you're seeing the evolution of this form, which is essentially serialized short films, and the sophistication or the growing sophistication of filmmakers. How are they adapting to using music? And I guess I'm getting the feeling it's evolving, or do you see a growth in this? Are they getting more sophisticated?
I'm sorry.
I haven't seen enough. I haven't seen enough web series, I think, to be able to comment on that specifically. I do know that there's a lot of obstacles web series face, in dealing with music, because it's, we talked about earlier, that it's an expensive line item. It's the line item that most directors think they can just skip over or do without, or I don't know, whatever. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. But I don't know. I don't know if I have a broad enough survey of what's out there to comment specifically.
Yeah, I mean, it's still the wild, wild west out there. I think it's project by project. If you, like The Guild, which is the web series I've worked on, it's been around for 5 years now. If you look at the first season, they have a little 15-second theme song, and there is no score. But later seasons, they started adding score. So I think it's really, it's the evolution of the web series and how it's been perceived and how it's actually become a thing. When 5 years ago, even the concept of web series was foreign to most people. So, yeah, I mean, I do see the evolution of it for sure, and I think it's just going to get more and more complex. But as we who make our living in the entertainment business making music, it's the question of, obviously the budgets are lower, so how do we make money doing this? And I think what's happening is the budgets for web series are getting larger. You're getting corporate sponsorship. You're getting companies that want to be involved in this, and it is, I think, really going to be the next frontier for all of us, whether you're whether you're the filmmaker or the musician, and it's really turning into something that I think I think we're all happy to be getting in and on the ground floor basically, and you know, riding the wave and continuing to you know, have more options and you know.
Yeah, I don't think this is a 2 or 3 year fad. I mean, this is definitely going to be a major force in entertainment.
And I'll say, because as a creator, as opposed to a composer, I can tell you right now, and I watch a lot of web series, I can tell you every budget I have has multiple line items for a score. Every single one that I'm developing has multiple line items for composers and score. Whether it's as big as I want right now, that's another issue, but it is bigger than it was. And I can also say that in my experience, the shows that are coming out right now, every one of them has an original score. Now, some of them don't. If it's Bob in the backyard shooting something, they're not going to have an original score. But the creators who are really out there and are serious about the space understand the importance. And I definitely have seen an evolution on that. Just like he said, when the Guild first started off, they had the da-da-da-da-da-da theme. That's all they had. That is not the same. They have a score now for their show. And I think that you're going to see that more and more. All of the shows that have been nominated for awards this weekend have original scores.
Great.
So
I have just another question, which is kind of a bit of a wonky business legal question. But in terms of the rights negotiated when you composed your stuff, are people asking you to do it as work for hire? Are they allowing you to just retain everything, you just license it back to them? Or I'm just curious how that's panning out.
It's a case-by-case basis, and you know, I have an admin publishing deal, so when I actually was approached to do this song for the Guild, I went to my publisher and said, look, this is what they're offering. It's not really conventional, but yeah, and there is that there and you know, for other series that I've worked on, there's some have been more of what looks like a standard television deal, and some have just been, well, we're going to give you this, and you get to keep the rights to this, or you don't, or you know. So you know, some of it's work for hire, some of it's partial, and that's all really undefined too. So it's once again, it is sort of wild west right now. But I think those things are going to, as it progresses, are going to sort of come together, and some standards will be set.
And I think also right now there's an interesting, I think a lot of that has to do with the PROs, the publishing rights organizations. And for instance, I'm part of ASCAP, and a few years ago they didn't really have any royalties for trailer music. Even though it was played in theaters, there was no, or TV spots, maybe very little. But now they've developed a whole system for trailer music. You can track your music, and you can track some royalties. And I think that as we develop in the web series world, and people figure out more how to basically make money from them, that'll affect the performing rights organizations, and that will affect, I think, more so, if it's worth it for the composers to try and own perhaps a slice of it, or something like that. You know, generally, if it's a really tiny budget, I generally, would negotiate that I would keep the publishing rights, but that the filmmaker would have the right to use it in the film in whatever form, and so usually that works out for both parties, even though right now it's not like there's any royalties coming in from web stuff.
Well, yeah, actually, that's a good question. Are the PROs tracking music?
Yeah, they are. I actually had I'm with BMI, and I think the right now both ASCAP and BMI have for example, they have a 3-year they both have 3-year contracts with YouTube, but the amount of money is ridiculously low. It's like I think ASCAP has $9 million a year and BMI has $10 million a year to split amongst all the writers for every song that's played on YouTube. That's nothing. I think the reason what I was told is the reason that is so low is because of the new technology. But after the 3-year contract is up, once it's proven and it's equal to or more than radio airplay, they can actually retroactively go back and raise it. So hopefully the revenue that's the incredible amount of revenue net that's now being generated. And remember, this has only been even just a couple of years that these sites are really starting to generate revenue. We as writers will, I've been assured, will eventually see that, but it's still, a few years away.
Yeah,
But if one of us started a website tomorrow that all of a sudden became the next YouTube, it unfortunately, the wheels turn very slowly of bureaucracy to catch up with that. So, but they assure us that they're on it.
Well, and there's the growth in the web space right now is ridiculous, and the amount of money that is starting to flow in there is getting ridiculous. We are seeing the budgets increase. We are seeing all this change. So I think most of us are convinced that it is going to get to that point where there is going to be, we got to make money at it, or we're not going to be doing it. So it's going to happen. It will get there. And I think we're at 11:50. Any other questions? If not, I want to thank you guys.
Wait, you have one? I saw you open your mouth.
Oh, God.
Longer than we think, but
Let's talk after this. I'll sit over and we'll talk for a while because we've had many conversations about that exact question. The last thing before I leave is, what's your favorite part of your score in Dragon Age? One part, go. Boom.
The ending when Felicia is on the rock, right at the end of the series.
Excellent, Jason.
actually, that's mine too. I love.
Oh,
that.
cheater.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, what was the question?
What's your favorite part of the score for Cell?
Episode 8, the cue is entitled "My Name is Sarah," where the main character says her name for the first time.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. We really appreciate it. And y'all enjoy the rest of the conference. We'll see you.